Welcome back to the Global Take. So we often hear about these huge corporate investments, right?
Yeah.
And they're always presented as these like game changers, especially for American manufacturing.
Yeah.
But what does like a $500 billion investment from Apple really mean? What's the actual impact? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
I'm excited to dig into this.
Yeah.
We've got a great piece here titled, What Does Apple's $500 billion pledge for U.S. production really mean? And it really kind of gets into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, it asks some really sharp questions.
Yeah.
So let's start with the big number.
Okay.
Apple is pledging $500 billion for U.S. investment
Wow.
over the next 4 years. I mean, it's almost hard to even wrap your head around a figure that big.
It's a lot of zeros.
Yeah, a lot of zeros.
Yeah.
But the article points out something really interesting.
Okay.
It's not clear how much of this is actually new spending.
Right. Because back in 2021, Apple committed to spending $430 billion over 5 years in the U.S. So, yeah, there's definitely some overlap there. And then we also have to consider that, inflation
Of course.
has really taken a bite out of the value of that 2021 pledge.
Right.
So what seems like this UGE increase, right,
Yeah.
might not be as dramatic as it first appears.
Okay, that's a great point.
Okay.
So if we're trying to like assess the real impact of this announcement, we need to look beyond just that headline number.
Absolutely.
So what about jobs?
Okay.
Apple says this investment will create about 20,000 new positions
Okay.
over the next 4 years.
Yeah.
But I don't know, doesn't that seem a bit low?
That does seem a little low.
Considering the massive scale of the investment?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to remember Apple already employs a lot of people in the U.S., so adding 20,000 jobs, while significant, represents, a relatively small increase to their existing workforce. So I think the question is, what kinds of jobs are these?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because you hear a lot about like automation,
Mm-hmm.
changing the face of manufacturing.
Right.
So are these new jobs going to be like highly skilled positions
Yeah.
requiring specialized training
Yeah.
or something else?
Yeah, well, the article didn't get into specifics, and that's part of the problem with these kinds of announcements. There's often just like a lack of transparency.
Right.
It makes you wonder what the real story is.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of transparency, the article also raised some questions about a few specific projects that Apple highlighted.
Okay.
For instance, their new server assembly plant in Houston, Texas.
Okay.
At 250,000 square feet, it sounds massive,
Yeah.
but apparently it's actually pretty small compared to like traditional manufacturing facilities.
Huh. Interesting.
So what does that tell us?
Well, it could be a sign of, how manufacturing is evolving. Maybe we're moving away from these like sprawling factories,
Yeah.
towards smaller, more specialized facilities. But again, without more information from Apple, it's hard to say for sure.
So it's almost like they're giving us like a glimpse behind the curtain, but not really showing us the whole picture.
Yeah, just a peek.
What about the Apple Manufacturing Academy in Detroit?
Okay.
The article seemed a bit skeptical, suggesting it might have been added to the announcement to make it more, appealing.
Yeah, I think retraining programs like that are incredibly important, especially as manufacturing becomes more, high tech.
Mm.
But the article's right to question those details, like how is this academy being funded? How many people will it actually train?
Mm-hmm.
These are important questions if we actually want to understand the real impact of this investment.
All right, so we've got this lack of transparency around the specific projects. But there's another big piece of the puzzle here, Apple's relationship with TSMC.
Yeah. Ah, yes, the TSMC connection. For those who aren't familiar, TSMC stands for Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. They're the world's largest contract chip maker. Essentially, they build the brains of a lot of our electronics, including iPhones. Apple is investing in TSMC's new Arizona fab, which is short for fabrication plant. And that has some interesting geopolitical implications.
Okay, so break this down for me. Why is this investment such a big deal?
Well, for one thing, it signals a shift in the global chip manufacturing landscape. TSMC is based in Taiwan, which has a complicated relationship with China. By investing in a TSMC plant in the U.S., Apple is diversifying its supply chain and potentially reducing its reliance on Taiwan.
That makes sense. And I remember the article mentioning something about potential tariffs. Could this investment be a way for Apple to avoid any new trade restrictions from the current administration?
It's definitely possible. Remember how China promised to address trade imbalances with the U.S. in the past? Tariffs were lowered, but those promises weren't fully kept. This could be Apple's way of getting ahead of any similar issues. A big announcement about investing in American manufacturing might help them avoid any future trade headaches.
It's almost like they're trying to play both sides, boosting their image as a supporter of American manufacturing, while also hedging their bets in case of trade tensions with China and Taiwan.
Exactly. And this raises a really important question. What does American manufacturing even mean in today's globalized world? When you have companies like Apple sourcing components from all over the globe, where does the line between domestic and foreign production really lie?
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to tell. And with this $500 billion pledge, it seems like Apple is further blurring those lines.
Right, and we can't forget that these grand investment initiatives often fall short of the initial hype. Remember the Stargate project? We rarely get a clear picture of what actually happened with all that money.
It's a good reminder to be cautious when we hear about these massive corporate pledges. The details or lack thereof are crucial.
Absolutely. Transparency and accountability are essential. Otherwise, it's just a PR exercise.
Okay, so after this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should we be thinking about when we hear these big announcements?
I think the most important thing is to be critical thinkers. Don't just accept the headline at face value. Dig deeper. Ask questions about transparency, accountability, and the potential motivations behind these pledges. What's the real story?
So instead of being swept up in the excitement,
Hmm.
we need to approach these announcements with a healthy dose of skepticism and look for the nuances.
Exactly. And it's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. We're not just talking about Apple's bottom line here. We're talking about the future of American manufacturing,
Mhm.
the global balance of power in the tech industry,
Yeah,
and maybe even the price you'll pay for your next smartphone.
wow, it really is a tangled web. So to bring it back to our listener, why should they care about all of this? What's the takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we need to be savvy consumers of information. When we see these grand announcements, especially those involving huge sums of money,
Yeah.
we need to dig deeper. Don't just accept the headline at face value. Look for the nuances, the potential motivations, and the long-term implications.
So it's not just about Apple and their investments. It's about how we as individuals engage with the news and the information we're bombarded with every day.
Precisely. We need to be critical thinkers and ask ourselves, what's the real story here? How does this impact me? And what questions aren't being answered?
Those are great questions to keep in mind. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Apple's $500 billion pledge. We've covered a lot of ground, from the complexities of global supply chains to the potential motivations behind these massive corporate investments. And we've left you with some important questions to ponder.
I always like to leave our listeners with something to think about. So here's a final thought-provoking question for you. Considering the intricate web of global supply chains and the ever-evolving landscape of technology, what does American manufacturing truly mean in the 21st century?
That's a question that will continue to spark debate and discussion for years to come. If you want to delve deeper into complex global issues like this one, be sure to subscribe to The Global Take. We'll bring you more insightful deep dives into the world's most pressing issues. Thanks for joining us.